welcome to this week's episode of What One Thing, One Business, One Story and One Lesson to take away in action every week for small business owners looking to grow. I'm Hayley Baxter.
And I'm Phil Davenport, and today we have the pleasure of talking to Steve Knowles. Steve became a qualified accountant at 23, having trained at a small firm. He then decided to take the dip that many of us do and work for a large multinational. However, he found this wasn't right for him as he couldn't make the difference he wanted to for those clients. He was offered 3 partnerships before setting up his own practice in 1985, and he started that with just himself and an apricot computer, that's one to Google. He ran the firm both in partnership and on his own for 37 years, by the end of which they were turning over £1.5 million and employing 30 staff. He thrives with making a positive difference to clients, and he counts himself in the 5% of accountants who have a personality. Shockingly, this is 3% higher than my fellow IT workers, but if you're listening to this pod, then you are definitely in that top percentile.
So before we get to your one thing, let us know, was there a challenge, a turning point or a wake-up moment just to set the scene?
Oh, absolutely. I think that we're in a business for 37 years. There's many wake-up calls, but the one I've got in mind happened in 2004. My business partner, a guy called Mick Warwick, who I'd been in partnership for about 16 years, decided he didn't want to be in partnership anymore, and I found myself buying him out. At the same time, I had an investment in a software company, and me and the major shareholder had fallen out, and there was a lot of stress that related to that. And over the next 18 months, I was so focused on the shareholder dispute outside the practice that I sort of lost control of the business. And I would say for the year to June 2020, we lost something like 70 or 80,000 pounds, which is a phenomenal amount of money to lose, and also lose it in an accountancy practice. So my wake-up moment came when I realised that this business wasn't going to survive unless I did something completely different. So I decided that what I would do is get some help, and I employed a management consultant. Management consultants get a bad press, generally speaking, but I needed somebody to come into the business to tell me what was wrong with it. So he spent a couple of weeks talking to everybody and looking around and asking questions and one thing and another. And eventually he sat in front of me and he said, "Steve, I found out what's wrong with your business." And I said, "Wow, that is exactly why you're here. What is wrong with my business?" And he said, "It's you. Simple and straightforward. You are the problem in this business." Which comes as a bit of a shock, when I've already run the business for 20 years. Why would I suddenly become the problem? And I think part of the issue was that by that stage we'd built, sort of 20 staff, something around that sort of level. We were managing it, or I was managing it through a group of teams. And what was happening is I wasn't keeping an eye on what the team leaders were doing. And the other problem I had was that I simply had too many ideas. If you look at my profile, you'll see I'm in the yellow area, which means I'm creative, and I have lots and lots of ideas. And what the consultant said to me is, the problem is, Steve, is that you come up with an idea and you give it to the management team, and the management team try to implement it. Before they've even thought about how they're going to implement it, you've given them another idea. And before they've even thought about that, you've given them a third and a fourth and a fifth, and they just cannot cope with the constant flow of ideas and suggestions about how the business should operate and what should be going on. So what you need to do is you need to recruit a person who's going to fix this problem. So what I did was I recruited a lady who became my PA. She became my fix-it. She became my project manager. She became the person who was responsible for making sure that the ideas I came up with actually got implemented. Now, the learning from that is really simple and straightforward. If you remember, what I said was that up to 2004, I had a partner, and me and Mick would figure out what we were going to do, and between us, we would make sure that whatever it was we thought was right, we would try and implement and put into place. Well, clearly, after he left, I didn't have that anymore. And my learning really was the fact that you can't do it all on your own. You've got to understand your own strengths and weaknesses, and you've got to get people in your business who will cover the areas where you're weak. Because if you don't, then it's not going to work. And that's the analogy I make is if you think about football teams, soccer teams, you can't have 11 goalkeepers on the pitch, can you? You can't have 11 strikers on the pitch. It doesn't work. You've got to have a goalkeeper, a defence, a midfield, and an attacking forward to actually score the goals. And that team contribution actually is what makes it successful. Now, it took
I'd like
a few
to
years.
jump in, if I may
Yeah.
do, Steve, and just dissect this a little bit more, because I think one of the immediate pieces that stood out to me was the business had lost 80,000 in that year. Now, most business owners will go, and I'm not going to have a dig at the two accountants we've got on the call, but they will go immediately. Things are going wrong. What I need to do is cease spending any external money. I need to cut every single cost. But you actually made, in my mind, a really bold decision to spend more money to bring in a management consultant. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of business owners who are listening who may be losing £4,000, £3,000, maybe just breaking even, maybe just a little bit of a profit, but are afraid or wary to bring in a consultant to try and grow. What went through your mind when you made that decision, or how did you kind of weigh up the pros and cons of that?
Well, one of the things I've learned over the years is that when you're in business, there are very few people who will give you an honest answer to a question. The management team have got their own agenda. Your family, your friends have all got their own agenda. So you need to bring somebody in who's completely cold, completely analytical in order to make sure that you get to the right answer. That was my decision. That was what I needed. And I also I'm a fairly strong character. So I only needed somebody who got the confidence to tell me exactly what they thought and what the potential solutions might be. Now, on the subject of spending money, as we went through that difficult period of the next sort of 5 years of borrowing what we call soft loans, cheap loans with little or no security, I continued to spend because what I realised as we went through the credit crunch was that everybody was cutting back on marketing, everybody was cutting back on training. And I realised that if I wanted my business to succeed, I needed to be in the networking and the places where other people were not going to. Because if you have a networking event and you're the only accountant there, because everybody else is saying, I'm not going to spend money on networking, you're going to get whatever business there is available.
So you started off by saying management consultants get quite a bad press, which they do. How did you go about selecting one to work with and go into it with that confidence that you did, that they were the right fit and that it wasn't just going to be, at the end of the day, a wasted amount of money?
Well, the answer to that, Hayley, is you've got to look at the history of the individual. What have they achieved and where they achieved it. But the bottom line is that with any interview at the end of the day, it's got to be a gut feeling. You've got to have a rapport with the person. You've got to believe in the person. And that only comes from spending a bit of time with them. Anybody who's looking for work and a consultant pitching to come and advise a business is looking for work, will tell you whatever you want to hear in order to get the work. And that's just human nature. So you've got to find somebody you can build a trust with. You've got to find somebody who has got something on their CV that tells you that they can actually achieve what you're asking them to achieve.
I love that. So you decided to go for a management consultant. Did you have 4 or 5 that you whittled down? Because I just know as a business owner that I'm terrible at wanting people to pitch against each other. How did you go through that process?
In this particular, yes, I do the same sort of thing. I will get 3 quotes for something and I'll pick the middle quote. Yes, that's how I've always done that sort of stuff. But this is different because this is a personal relationship between you and the consultant, and you have to build that trust initially before you're going to tell them all the things that are going wrong in your business.
So how did you do that then?
Sitting down and talking and getting a sense of what that person was about.
So you got to the point where you knew who you wanted to work with. They'd obviously gone into your business and spoke to your team and came to you with what the problem was. So what did you do next?
Well, I was surprised because as business owners, we think we're infallible. We think we're the best thing since sliced bread and all that sort of stuff. But you have to take a step back and you have to realise, well, actually, this is what's been happening. I'm in charge of this and therefore I am ultimately responsible. And if I don't take notice of what somebody who is honestly trying to tell me, then I'll be a fool, won't I? The money would then be wasted. But it wasn't just a question of me, it was also a question of the management team and rebuilding the team around a group of people who had the vision, let's call it, that I had for what the practice could be.
I think a couple of bits have really stuck out to me so far. One is, and we talk about kind of personality types a lot nowadays, but I'm certainly equally guilty as yourself, Steve, that I come up with ideas really fast and I forget that everybody isn't as fast as me. One of the real admirable things that I like is, and this is where I think a lot of us struggle, that you asked for advice and then you took the advice. Because how many times do we go out there and ask for advice and it doesn't agree with what we wanted to do? And so we then, step two is dismiss the advice. What kind of signs do you think somebody could pick out that maybe this was the route they'd need to go to before the crash had happened?
When in the sort of 6 or 7 months after Mick Warwick left, I was in a bit of a fool's paradise. We got enough money to be able to do whatever we wanted. I didn't have a restraint on me anymore as to what I could do and how I could do it. So I remember buying things I shouldn't have bought, bits of kit or little toys that for the office that actually were a complete waste of time and effort. So I didn't recognise that in myself to start with. But the big thing that made the business turn in the wrong direction was the dispute in the other company, which ended up in court. It ended up with settlements and one thing and another. And that was the big thing that really, really distracted me.
And I think that's the thing. It's the distraction, isn't it? So I think I'm understanding you took your eye off the ball and then the ball's dropped, I guess.
Yes.
How long did it take to fully recover?
I would say 5 to 6 years. Because you've got to remember that was the time of the credit crunch. There were lots of problems going on in the wider economy and things of that nature. There's one time in particular I remember when we really struggled to pay the wages, which was a bit unfortunate because it was also Christmas.
In that sense, and I might be completely wrong as I often am with these, Steve, it feels like you had the first business set up and you felt it was mature, and so you've moved away to it. And I haven't done this yet because I've not got to that stage, but I think as business owners, we then start to work on more business products because we've got that one up. And then what's happened is that business wasn't as mature as you thought because maybe you didn't have a new Steve in place, if you will do, somebody that you delegated down that control to. And so when things got rocky in the second, and I've certainly spoken to people when things get rocky, the second, third, fourth and fifth business, it takes a toll on that first one. That's what it feels like happened. And then what you did was you swept back, went back to basics, back to your core business, and really solidified that. Is that kind of how this has gone through?
Yeah, I mean, the software business was doing okay, but as I say, we had a major shareholder dispute, which took all my time and effort because I was at the centre of that storm, and yes, that was difficult, very, very difficult. And I thought I got people in place within the practice that could cope and could manage it on a day-to-day basis, but it turned out not to be the case.
So, I'm going to ask, if you were to give some advice to another business owner listening today who's in a similar situation, what would that be?
I think the most important thing, if you want your business to grow and progress, you've got to accept that you're going to put people into positions of authority in order to take the load off you, because you cannot be all things to all people all the time. It's physically impossible. And one of the reasons why I think we've got so many small businesses in the UK is because people don't have the capacity to hand over control or significant influence of their businesses to other people. I think it's a fundamental problem that we have in the UK. So I would say build a team that you can trust and you can depend upon. Don't try to be everything all day, every day. And then you've got the prospect of actually being able to grow something that's got some substance to it.
And I think it is a great point, because it's a challenge of growing, isn't it? You can't physically do everything. You have to have a team to support you. And I was actually speaking to another business owner yesterday about a similar situation, and it's how you build that team that treat your customers and deal with things with the essence of you and how you instill that across a growing team. And that it's a really big challenge, because it's really difficult because you can't control people. And you're giving them so much trust when it's something you've built yourself and put so much into. There is something that's in my head. You can't manage people, you can't control people, you can just control the process or something like that. But the process doesn't control the culture and the values and how you speak, how they interact with people. And it's a challenge. I think every business owner that's growing a business with a team will have that problem.
Yeah, I mean, what I did was I sat with the team, created a series of values that we would all agree to, which actually really worked well, because if somebody did something, I would sit with them and I'd say, you've done this. Do we accept we've done this? Yes. Well, how does that fit with our values? And they'd almost hang themselves, if you like, in the process, because they'd realise it couldn't possibly agree with the values that we'd previously agreed. And the other thing I used to do was when people came to me with a problem, I would ask them first what their solution to the problem was. Now, they would never, ever come up with the answer that I would have given. But if their answer was 90%, 95% good enough, I would let them run with it. And what it also did, the other thing that did was it enabled me to place more and more trust in people as I started to understand their thinking and their solution process. And that worked really well.
I actually think that's a phenomenal lesson to take. I think we've had a lot of lessons as we've gone through, but I think that last one is really poignant with me, that I would maybe even go 80% rather than 90%. That if someone else suggests a solution, I am definitely guilty of saying, look, I think there's a better way, we should do it this way, as opposed to saying, let's run with your process. And probably at the end of that process saying, let's have an evaluation, let's see how that goes. Where do you think we could have tweaked that? And so then, in fact, probably creating a better process than what I would describe as my maverick process to start off with. I think that's been a phenomenal one thing. I think we've got so many lessons out of that. And now, Steve, it comes time for what I like to describe as a shameless plug. Please tell us a little bit about your ideal client, your offering, and how people can get in touch with you.
Thank you, Phil. Well, what I'd do is I'd just take you back 3 years to start off with, because I decided that me and the business had different needs. So I decided to sell. So I sold my business exactly 3 years ago. And since then, because I thrive on helping small businesses, what I've done is I've taken on a peer-to-peer franchise, which gets small businesses into a room, gets them talking about their issues within their business. We have some structured learning in there to give it some direction. So I'm still sitting in front of small businesses and helping them succeed and progress and move forward. I'm absolutely convinced at the age that I am that everybody needs a purpose in their life. And if I'd have just retired from the practice and just hung up my quill, so to speak, I would have had no purpose. And that is not a healthy place to be.
How could people get in touch, Steve, if they want to join the peer group, if they want to have you assist and help them on that journey to becoming, hopefully, a mega business where they can delegate, abdicate, and then maybe start some more businesses on that journey?
Well, you can email me at steve.knowles@peertopeer.global. You can call me 07802 863 880, or you'll find me on LinkedIn. Looking for entrepreneurs is my tagline.
Thank you so much for joining us, Steve.
Wow, what an incredible guest and what an incredible journey Steve's been on that's taken him to that point of what one thing. That's certainly a spectacular rise, fall, and rise again. What was your big takeaway, Hayley?
The big takeaway for me was that it just goes to show that business does have ups and downs, peaks and troughs. And even if you're a seasoned business owner with lots of knowledge and, I suppose, a group of people, a network of people that are other business owners that can help you and advise you and guide you, that actually even with all of that, sometimes it just doesn't go the right way. And I think that we didn't touch on it a lot in the episode, but there must have been a huge emotional toll that I think that must have taken. And I think that just shows you have to have a strength of character to be a business owner. So there's quite a few things that weren't said that I think I took away from it, if that makes any sense whatsoever. What about you?
Yeah, I think there's always a great piece of advice that is all things will pass, won't they? Everything will pass if you can just stay in the game. I think my biggest takeaway was the allowing staff to go their own way, so to speak, to use their own methodology, even if that's not to perfection, but the importance and the cleverness of having those values so that when you do reappraise it, you can look at those values. And also, as per one of our previous kind of chats or pods, those marginal gains. I think all of these things start to add up as we've gone through the pods. I've definitely become a better business owner myself. And I think, letting staff have that freedom to do a job, even if it's not the way you thought it would be done, and even if it may take a little bit longer or seem to be more complex than the method you'd have chosen, and then having that evaluation at the end and looking to make marginal gains so that the systems that you've got in place might not be your systems, but they're systems that can be followed and that match with your own values.
Yeah, I think there are lots of challenges running a business, as great as it is. Like, I always think we make it sound horrible, whereas it isn't. I wouldn't want to do anything else, being completely truthful. But I do think that having staff or a team is one of the bigger challenges of running a business for lots and lots of reasons. I think having the processes in place is a good start for them. But I think you don't want to employ robots. We've got enough of those coming down the chain. And I think as businesses, as we go into kind of the next 5 years or more, your staff and the way that they deal with your customers, particularly if you are people facing, we're service business owners ourselves. So there's always going to be a human on the other side that we're dealing with. I think your staff are, and the way that your team interacts with them and supports your business is going to become even more important, and actually will begin to make the difference between the businesses that do survive and the businesses that don't.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. In this world of AI and blah, 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 I think there's going to be two things. Businesses that stay still are going to get caught out because other businesses are going to be able to show a lot more value as they use AI. I think in our chat with Ian Phillips, one of the things that he talked about with AI was that it would allow us to give more value to existing customers rather than to take on more customers at the same value level. And I think that's going to be a game changer. The businesses that don't understand that and try to use AI just to make more profit. And secondly, just like you're saying, the businesses that aren't putting a nice front end on their processes, because ultimately people buy people.
Yeah.
And even if someone gives you a great product, if you don't like to speak to them, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And something that we've done recently with our team is to involve them heavily in the setting of the processes or the reviewing of the processes. Because I kind of feel like by doing that, you're bringing them on that journey, and by having that open discussion and not, we talked about in the podcast about how to do it my way rather than that you're actually, by doing that, doing this process, it's been really interesting for Hayley to shut her mouth and not tell everybody what to do, and let the team actually bring, this is a problem and this doesn't work, this takes me ages, and to have that kind of space where it's not just me telling them what to do. That's been really, really useful. And actually, we 100% have got a better set of processes than we did have before, or than we would have had with just me saying, this is what we should do. So I think that's a good lesson to learn, to involve the team in it. But it's a huge challenge of growing a business. And it's the way they interact with the clients. Sometimes that's the bit you really can't control, like what they say and how they say it.
Yeah, and I think those conversations with customers come down to your values, down to delegating, not abdicating. So maybe listening to some of those recording of the calls with your staff and saying, do we feel that this was, and often you are literally saying, this was fantastic, well done, but I'm not giving you a pay rise. In other instances, you may be having a different conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you found one thing to help move your business forward.
And if you did, please do us a favour. Share this episode with someone else who's on the same journey. We'll see you next time on What One Thing.